We gave you every opportunity and you threw it away, Mom sobbed dramatically in court. Dad nodded. My lawyer stayed calm. Then Judge Harrison stopped reading, looked up slowly, and said, "Wait. I read about this company in Forbes last week. Someone here is lying to my face." The courtroom smelled like old wood and broken promises. I sat perfectly still at the defendant's table, watching my mother dab at dry eyes with a tissue she'd been clutching for the better part of an hour. My father stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder in what I'm sure looked like a supportive gesture to anyone who didn't know better. "Your Honor," my mother's voice cracked with practiced emotion, "we gave her every opportunity. Every single chance to make something of herself. And she threw it all away." My lawyer, Catherine Wells, didn't even flinch. She'd warned me this would happen. 3 months ago, when my parents first filed a lawsuit claiming I'd stolen their business concept and demanding 60% of my company's equity, Catherine had looked me dead in the eye and said they'd try to paint me as an ungrateful failure. She'd been right about everything so far. Judge Harrison was reading through the documents my parents had submitted. The courtroom was silent except for the occasional rustle of paper and my mother's theatrical sniffling. I studied the judge's face, looking for any hint of what he might be thinking. He was in his early 60s, with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. "We've been in court for nearly 7 months now, ever since my parents filed this lawsuit last spring. 7 months of depositions, discovery, and legal maneuvering that had cost me time, energy, and focus I should have been putting into my company." My father finally spoke. "We supported her through everything, Your Honor. Paid for her education, gave her a roof over her head well into her 20s. We even tried to help her start a legitimate business, but she wanted nothing to do with honest work." I felt Catherine's hand on my arm, a gentle reminder not to react. The lies were so thick in the air I could barely breathe, but I stayed silent. We prepared for this. Every word they spoke was digging their grave deeper, even if they didn't realize it yet. The story they were telling the court was simple and devastating. According to my parents, I'd been a lazy, entitled daughter who refused to work a real job. They claimed to have developed a revolutionary software concept for small business management 3 years ago, spending countless hours and their retirement savings on research and development. Then, they alleged, I'd stolen their work, launched my own company, and cut them out entirely. What they didn't mention was how I'd been supporting myself since I was 17. How I'd worked 3 jobs to put myself through community college because they'd refused to help pay for anything beyond high school. How my legitimate business they tried to help me start was actually a pyramid scheme they wanted me to run, recruiting my friends and former classmates to sell overpriced supplements. Judge Harrison looked up from the papers. "Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Mitchell, these are serious allegations. You're claiming your daughter, Miss Tessa Mitchell, stole intellectual property you developed and turned it into." He glanced at another document, True Managed Solutions, which according to this filing, is now valued at approximately $8 million. "Yes, Your Honor," my father said firmly. "We trusted her with our ideas, our notes, everything. She took advantage of that trust." The judge turned to Catherine. "Ms. Wells, I assume your client disputes these claims?" Catherine stood, and I saw the hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "We do more than dispute them, Your Honor. We can prove they're completely fabricated." My mother made a wounded sound. "How can you say that? After everything we sacrificed?" "Mrs. Mitchell," Judge Harrison said gently but firmly, "please let counsel speak." Catherine opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit into evidence the complete development history of True Managed Solutions. This includes time-stamped code repositories dating back 4 years, copyright registrations, patent applications, and correspondence with investors, all in my client's name alone." She walked forward and handed copies to the judge and to my parents' attorney, a nervous-looking man named Gerald Porter who'd probably taken this case thinking it would be an easy payday. "Furthermore," Catherine continued, "we have documentation showing that Ms. Mitchell was entirely self-supporting during the period when this software was supposedly being developed. Bank records, tax returns, and lease agreements all demonstrate that she received no financial support from her parents after the age of 17. My father's face was turning red. "That's not true. We helped her whenever she needed it." Catherine didn't even look at him. "Your Honor, we're also prepared to demonstrate that Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell have no background whatsoever in software development, business management, or technology. Mr. Mitchell worked as an insurance salesman for 30 years before retiring. Mrs. Mitchell was a part-time receptionist at a dental office. Neither has ever filed a patent, registered a copyright, or demonstrated any technical knowledge that would support their claims." Judge Harrison was looking at the documents Catherine had submitted, his expression growing more focused. He flipped through several pages, then stopped. His eyebrows rose slightly. Ms. Wells, is your client the same Tessa Mitchell who was featured in the December issue of Forbes magazine's annual 30 Under 30 list? My heart started pounding. Catherine had told me about the article, which had been published 3 weeks ago in their special year-end edition. She is, Your Honor, Catherine confirmed. The judge looked at me directly for the first time. Ms. Mitchell, you're 27 years old? I stood up, my legs shaking slightly. Yes, Your Honor. He looked back at my parents. And you're claiming you developed this software concept when exactly? My mother hesitated. Well, it was about 3 years ago. We'd been working on it for months before Tessa stole everything. Judge Harrison removed his reading glasses. I read that Forbes article when the issue came out a few weeks ago. It was quite detailed. It described how Ms. Mitchell started developing TrueManage while working as a night janitor at a tech startup, teaching herself to code using free online resources. It mentioned how she spent 5 years building the initial product while working multiple jobs to support herself. The color was draining from my mother's face. The article, Judge Harrison continued, his voice taking on an edge, also detailed her background. How she put herself through community college with no family support. How she lived in her car for 3 months while finishing the first version of her software. I'd never told my parents about living in my car. That had been the lowest point, the winter I was 23, when I couldn't afford both rent and the server costs for my beta testing. I'd parked behind a 24-hour diner, used their bathroom to clean up before my morning shift at the coffee shop, and coded in public libraries and coffee shops where I could plug in my laptop and phone to charge them. At night, I'd run my car engine for heat and to keep my devices charged, carefully rationing my gas money. Your Honor, Gerald Porter interjected weakly, the Forbes article is hardly legal evidence. You're right, Mr. Porter. It's not. Judge Harrison put his glasses back on and picked up another document from Catherine's folder. But this is. Ms. Wells, walk me through this timeline. Catherine's smile was no longer hidden. Of course, Your Honor. 5 years and 2 months ago, Ms. Mitchell registered the domain name TrueManage.com. We have the registration records here. 5 years ago, she filed her first provisional patent application for the core algorithm that powers the software. 4 years and 8 months ago, she incorporated TrueManage Solutions as an LLC in Delaware. She pulled out another set of papers. Here are the GitHub repositories showing the initial code commits, all timestamped and attributed to Ms. Mitchell's verified account. The earliest commits date back 5 years and 3 months. We can trace the entire development history, every single line of code, every update, every revision. My father tried to interrupt. She could have backdated all of that. Judge Harrison held up his hand. Mr. Mitchell, these are third-party platforms with their own timestamp verification systems. They can't be backdated. He looked at Gerald Porter. Mr. Porter, did you verify any of your client's claims before filing this lawsuit? Gerald looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. We relied on our client's sworn statements, Your Honor. I see. The judge's tone could have frozen fire. Ms. Wells, continue. Catherine was in her element now. Your Honor, we also have correspondence between Ms. Mitchell and her first angel investor, dated 4 years and 5 months ago. Tax returns showing income from TrueManage Solutions dating back 4 years. Contract agreements with her first 20 clients. Testimonials from business owners who started using the software in its beta phase. She pulled out yet another document. And this is perhaps most relevant, we have a certified letter from Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell to their daughter, dated 3 years and 1 month ago. My mother went very still. In this letter, Catherine read, the Mitchells expressed their disappointment that Ms. Mitchell has wasted her time on a foolish computer project instead of getting a real job. They inform her that they will no longer acknowledge her as their daughter unless she gives up this nonsense and starts acting like a responsible adult. The letter is notarized and was sent via certified mail. Judge Harrison held out his hand for the letter. Catherine walked it over to him. He read it slowly, his jaw tightening with each line. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, he said finally, you sent your daughter a letter disowning her because she was building the very company you now claim to have created? My mother started crying, real tears this time. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone watching their plan fall apart. My father tried a different approach. Your Honor, we were upset with her at the time. We didn't understand what she was doing. But we'd still shared our ideas with her before that letter was sent. She took our concept and ran with it. What concept? Judge Harrison's patience was clearly wearing thin. Please describe for the court, in your own words, what this revolutionary software concept was. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at my mother. She looked at Gerald Porter. Gerald looked at his notes and stammered, "It's a business management tool that helps small companies track their operations." That's incredibly vague, Mr. Porter. Judge Harrison turned back to my parents. Can either of you explain the technical aspects of this concept you supposedly developed? Silence. Can you tell me what programming language would be used? More silence. Can you explain the difference between front-end and back-end development? My father finally spoke. We had the idea, Your Honor. We didn't need to know all the technical details. That's what we needed Tessa for. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair. So let me understand this correctly. You, two people with no technical background, no business experience in software development, no documentation of any kind prior to your daughter's proven development timeline, expect this court to believe you created a concept so revolutionary that it became an $8 million company, and your daughter somehow stole it despite the fact that every piece of verifiable evidence shows she built this entirely on her own? The silence that followed was deafening. Gerald Porter shuffled through his papers frantically, searching for something, anything, that might salvage this disaster. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. Catherine remained standing, radiating quiet confidence. Your Honor, if I may continue, there's additional evidence that directly contradicts the plaintiff's timeline. Judge Harrison gestured for her to proceed. We have testimony from Dr. Patricia Moore, a computer science professor at State University, whom Ms. Mitchell consulted during the early development phase. Dr. Moore kept detailed records of their meetings, including notes on the algorithm's architecture and Ms. Mitchell's questions about optimization. Catherine handed over another document. These meetings occurred 4 years ago, documented in Dr. Moore's office calendar and corroborated by email exchanges. My mother whispered something to my father, her expression desperate. He shook his head, looking defeated for the first time since this whole ordeal began. We also have statements from Ms. Mitchell's former employers during the relevant time period, Catherine continued. Her night supervisor at Tech Core Solutions, where she worked as a janitor from ages 22 to 26, recalls seeing her studying programming books during breaks. Her manager at the coffee shop where she worked mornings remembers her constantly sketching flowcharts on napkins. I'd forgotten about those napkins. Marcus, my old manager, had been incredibly kind to me during those years. He'd let me stay after my shift ended, nursing a single coffee for hours while I worked on my laptop. When I'd finally been able to quit both jobs to focus on True Manage full-time, I'd made sure to list his coffee shop as one of my first business clients. Your Honor, Gerald Porter stood up, his voice strained. May I request a brief recess to consult with my clients? Judge Harrison checked his watch. Mr. Porter, I don't see how a recess will change the fundamental facts of this case. Your clients have presented zero credible evidence to support their claims. Zero documentation, zero witnesses, zero technical knowledge, and a timeline that contradicts every verifiable piece of information we've seen today. Gerald sat back down heavily. My father leaned forward to whisper something to him, but Gerald just shook his head. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Mitchell, the judge addressed them directly. I'm going to ask you both a very direct question, and I remind you that you're under oath. Did you have any involvement whatsoever in the creation, development, or initial funding of True Manage Solutions? My mother's hands were shaking. We raised her. We gave her the values and work ethic that made her capable of building something like this. That's not what I asked, Judge Harrison said firmly. Did you contribute to the actual creation of this software? Did you write code, design interfaces, develop algorithms, or provide technical guidance of any kind? No, my father finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But we gave her life. We fed her, clothed her, put a roof over her head for 18 years. That has to count for something. Judge Harrison removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mr. Mitchell, by that logic, every parent would be entitled to a portion of their adult children's earnings for the rest of their lives. That's not how the law works. That's not how any of this works. Catherine glanced at me, and I could see the question in her eyes. She wanted to know if I was okay, if watching my parents humiliate themselves in open court was too much for me. I gave her a small nod. I was fine. Better than fine, actually. There was something almost cathartic about seeing them forced to tell the truth. Your Honor, Catherine said, I have one more piece of evidence that I believe is crucial to this case. She pulled out a slim folder I hadn't seen before. 8 months ago, shortly after the Forbes article announced that Ms. Mitchell's company had completed its Series B funding round of $12 million, bringing the total company valuation to $22 million, Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell contacted their daughter for the first time in over 3 years. She handed the folder to the judge. This is a recording of that phone conversation. Ms. Mitchell, anticipating potential legal issues given her parents' history, recorded the call with proper notification at the beginning. It's admissible in this state. My stomach clenched. I'd almost forgotten about that call. It had come out of nowhere, my mother's number flashing on my screen one ordinary Tuesday afternoon in April. I debated not answering, but curiosity had won out. "Would you like me to play it, Your Honor?" Catherine asked. Judge Harrison nodded. "Please do." Catherine connected her phone to a small speaker she'd brought. The courtroom filled with the sound of ringing, then my voice. "This call is being recorded." "Hello?" My mother's voice came through, saccharine sweet. "Tessa. Sweetheart, it's Mom. How are you?" "I'm fine. Why are you calling?" My recorded voice was guarded. "Can't a mother call her daughter? We saw the news about your company. $5 million. We're so proud of you, honey." There was a pause on the recording. "You sent me a letter 2 years ago saying I'd wasted my life, and you were ashamed to call me your daughter." My father's voice cut in. He'd been on the call too, though I hadn't realized it at first. "Now, Tessa, we were just concerned about you. We didn't understand what you were building. But we've always believed in you. That's not true, and you know it." My voice was steady on the recording, calmer than I'd felt during the actual conversation. "What do you really want?" My mother's tone shifted slightly, losing some of its warmth. "Well, we've been thinking. We're getting older, and retirement isn't as comfortable as we'd hoped. With your success, we thought maybe you could help us out. After all, we're family." "Help you out how?" "We were thinking $100,000 would let us retire properly. Maybe buy that condo in Florida we've always wanted. It's really the least you could do after everything we've done for you." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Every eye was on my parents. My mother had gone pale. My recorded voice responded, "You want me to give you $100,000 because you're my parents? Not because you helped me build this company or supported me in any way, but just because we're related?" My father jumped in. "Tessa, don't be dramatic. We fed you, raised you, kept you safe for 18 years. You owe us. I don't owe you anything. You did the bare minimum that the law required. I've been completely self-sufficient since I was 17 years old. You disowned me 3 years ago for pursuing this exact business. That's an ungrateful way to talk to your parents," my mother snapped, the sweetness completely gone now. "We could have put you up for adoption. We could have made your childhood a lot harder than it was. So you want me to pay you for not abusing or abandoning me? That's your argument?" There was a long pause on the recording. Then my father's voice, harder now, "Listen, Tessa. You're going to help us out, one way or another. We're your parents. We have rights." "What rights exactly?" "We'll figure that out. But you'd better think long and hard about saying no to us. Family is important, and you don't want to make enemies of your own mother and father." The recording ended there because I'd hung up. Catherine turned off the speaker. Judge Harrison's expression had transformed from stern to genuinely angry. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, did you just hear yourselves? You essentially threatened your daughter on a recorded line because she wouldn't give you money you hadn't earned." My mother tried to speak, but the judge held up his hand. "And that threat, that claim that you'd figure out what rights you had, led directly to this lawsuit, didn't it? When she refused to pay you off, you decided to claim ownership of her company instead." Gerald Porter looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "Your Honor, my clients may have been indelicate in that conversation, but it doesn't prove they don't have legitimate claims to the intellectual property." "Mr. Porter, it proves exactly that," Judge Harrison shot back. "They're not claiming IP theft because they actually developed anything. They're claiming it because they see their daughter's success as a resource to be exploited. This is extortion dressed up in legal language." Catherine stepped forward again. "Your Honor, there's one more thing. After that phone call, Ms. Mitchell received a letter from her parents' previous attorney, a Mr. Richard Stevens. In that letter, Mr. Stevens outlined a proposal. Ms. Mitchell could pay her parents $250,000, and they would sign an agreement never to make any claims against her or her company." She handed over yet another document. Ms. Mitchell refused. Mr. Stevens then withdrew from representing the Mitchells, citing ethical concerns in his withdrawal filing. 3 weeks later, after the Mitchells retained Mr. Porter here, she received this lawsuit claiming her parents had created the core concept of true marriage and were entitled to 60% equity. The demand escalated from $250,000 in cash to approximately $13 million in equity, specifically because they'd learned the true valuation of the company from the Forbes article. Judge Harrison read the letter from the previous attorney. Where is Mr. Stevens now? Why isn't he representing the plaintiffs? He withdrew from the case, Your Honor, Catherine said. According to the withdrawal filing, it was due to irreconcilable differences regarding case strategy and ethics. That detail was new to me. I hadn't known their first lawyer had quit. Gerald Porter, it seemed, had been their second choice, someone willing to take a case that another attorney had found too ethically problematic to pursue. My father suddenly stood up. Your Honor, this is all being twisted. We love our daughter. We just want what's fair. Sit down, Mr. Mitchell, Judge Harrison ordered. What's fair is that Ms. Mitchell keeps 100% of what she built through her own effort, intelligence, and determination. What's fair is that parents don't get to claim ownership of their adult children's achievements. My father remained standing. We gave her everything. Our time, our energy, our resources. Your Honor, I heard myself speaking before I'd consciously decided to. May I respond to that? Judge Harrison looked surprised but nodded. Go ahead, Ms. Mitchell. I stood up, my hands gripping the edge of the table. The last birthday present I received from my parents was a card with $20 in it when I turned 13. After that, they said I was old enough to earn my own money for things I wanted. When I needed supplies for school, I babysat. When I wanted to go on the class trip to Washington, D.C. in 10th grade, I worked at a grocery store after school for 6 months. My voice was steady, but I could feel old wounds reopening. When I graduated high school, they gave me a month to find a job and start paying rent or move out. I moved out. I worked full-time at a fast food restaurant, and went to community college at night because they refused to fill out the financial aid forms that would have qualified me for grants. My mother started to protest, but Judge Harrison silenced her with a look. When I was 20, I continued, I got pneumonia. I had no health insurance and couldn't afford to miss work, so I kept going to my shifts until I collapsed during one. A coworker drove me to the emergency room. I called my parents from the hospital, and my mother told me I needed to be more careful about my health because they couldn't afford to help me with medical bills. The courtroom was silent except for my voice. I spent 4 years teaching myself to code. 4 years working multiple jobs, living in inadequate housing, sometimes going hungry to save money for server costs and software licenses. During those 4 years, my parents never once asked how I was doing. Never offered support or encouragement. Never showed the slightest interest in what I was building. I looked directly at them for the first time. The only time you contacted me was when you saw that I was successful. And the only thing you wanted was money. So no, you didn't give me everything. You gave me the legal minimum required to avoid neglect charges, and you remind me of that fact as if it makes you heroes. My mother was crying again, but these tears looked real. My father's face had gone from red to ashen. You taught me something invaluable, though, I said, my voice softer now. You taught me that I was capable of surviving without you. That I didn't need your approval or your help to build something meaningful. And for that lesson, as painful as it was, I'm actually grateful. I sat back down. Catherine squeezed my hand under the table. Judge Harrison took a long moment before speaking. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for that testimony. I think it clarifies a great deal about this case. He turned to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, I've presided over many difficult family disputes. I've seen parents and children fight over inheritances, business partnerships, and property. But I have never seen a case quite as clear-cut as this one. He picked up his gavel. Your claims are not just unsupported by evidence. They are contradicted by every piece of documentation we've examined today. More than that, they are morally bankrupt. You are attempting to profit from achievements you not only didn't contribute to but actively discouraged. My mother sobbed harder. She's our daughter. We raised her. We deserve something. And there it was. The truth, finally. Judge Harrison's expression shifted from stern to something closer to disgust. Mrs. Mitchell, your daughter's success does not entitle you to a portion of what she built. The fact that you gave birth to her does not grant you ownership of her achievements. He looked at the documents spread across his bench. I've seen many cases in my 23 years on this bench, but this might be one of the most transparent attempts at exploitation I've encountered. Ms. Wells, does your client wish to countersue for legal fees and damages? Catherine looked at me. We discussed this possibility. I could make them pay for putting me through this nightmare. I could demand compensation for the time, stress, and damage to my reputation. I thought about the years of criticism and dismissal. The times they'd called me foolish for pursuing my dream. The fact that they'd only reached out after Forbes published that article, suddenly interested in their daughter's computer hobby once it had a $sign attached to it. But I also thought about the person I'd become despite them, not because of them. The life I'd built without their support or approval. "No, Your Honor," I said quietly. "I just want this to end." Judge Harrison nodded slowly. "Very well. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, your lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. That means you cannot refile these claims. Additionally, I'm imposing sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit. You will pay Ms. Mitchell's legal fees in full, which according to the filing here amount to $42,000. My mother gasped. My father's face went from red to purple. Furthermore, the judge continued, "I'm issuing a protective order. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, you are prohibited from contacting Ms. Mitchell directly or indirectly, from attempting to interfere with her business, and from making any further legal claims related to True Managed Solutions without first obtaining permission from this court. Any violation of this order will result in contempt charges." He banged his gavel. "We're adjourned." As the judge left the courtroom, my parents sat frozen in their seats. Gerald Porter was already packing his briefcase, clearly eager to escape. Catherine squeezed my shoulder. "You did great," she said softly. I watched my parents, these people who'd given me life but never really supported it. My mother was whispering furiously to my father, probably blaming him for the lawyer they'd chosen, for the strategy that had failed so spectacularly. They tried to take credit for my success when they'd done everything possible to prevent it. They'd seen the Forbes article, saw the company valuation, and decided they deserved a piece of it simply because we shared DNA. As Catherine and I walked toward the exit, my father called out, "Tessa, wait." I stopped but didn't turn around. "We're still your parents," he said, his voice stripped of the confidence it had held earlier. "You can't just cut us out of your life." I looked back at him then. "You cut me out 2 years ago. Remember? I wasn't acting like a responsible adult." My mother stood up, her mascara running. "We made a mistake. We didn't know you'd actually succeed." And that, somehow, hurt more than anything they'd done in court. They hadn't believed in me. Even now, their surprise wasn't that they'd misjudged my capabilities, it was that I'd proven them wrong. "Goodbye," I said simply. Catherine and I walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The courthouse steps were crowded with people heading to other hearings, other legal battles, other family dramas playing out in front of strangers. My phone buzzed. A text from my lead developer, "Austin, how'd it go?" I typed back, "It's over." 3 dots appeared, then, "Drinks tonight to celebrate?" I smiled. "Absolutely." Catherine hailed a cab. Before she got in, she turned to me. "You know what impressed me most about this whole thing? You never wavered. Not once. You knew what you'd built, and you never let their lies make you doubt yourself." I thought about that. She was right. 3 months of legal battles, accusations, and attacks on my character, and I'd never questioned what I knew to be true. I'd built True Manage from nothing. I'd written every line of code in those early versions. I'd pitched to investors while running on 3 hours of sleep and coffee shop Wi-Fi. I'd lived in my car rather than give up on my vision. They taught me something valuable, I told Catherine. They taught me I didn't need their approval or support to succeed. They just didn't realize that was what they were teaching me. She smiled and got into the cab. "Send me the bill for those drinks. We're expensing this celebration." I walked to my own car, a used hybrid I bought 2 years ago when True Manage finally became profitable. I could afford something nicer now, but this car represented something important. It was the first thing I bought without debt, without worry, without fear. My phone rang as I was pulling out of the parking lot. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Tessa Mitchell?" A woman's voice, professional but warm. "Speaking. This is Rachel Kim from Tech Founders Magazine. I was at your court hearing today. I hope you don't mind, but it's public record, and I've been following your story since the Forbes piece." My stomach tightened. "Okay. I'd like to write an article about what happened today. Not a hit piece," she added quickly. "A story about entrepreneurs who face exploitation from family members after achieving success. It's more common than people realize, and I think your case illustrates it perfectly. Would you be willing to talk to me?" I pulled over into a coffee shop parking lot. This was a decision that required my full attention. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course. I'll email you my contact information. No pressure, but I think your story could help other people in similar situations. After we hung up, I sat in my car watching people come and go from the coffee shop. Young professionals with laptops. Parents with small children. An elderly couple sharing a muffin. My parents had tried to claim ownership of my success because they couldn't fathom that I'd achieved it without them. They'd rewritten history in their own minds, convinced themselves they deserved credit for something they'd actively tried to stop me from pursuing. But here's what they didn't understand: their lack of support had been a gift. It had forced me to be resourceful, resilient, and completely self-reliant. Every obstacle they put in my way had made me stronger. Every time they told me I was wasting my time had fueled my determination to prove them wrong. I pulled out my laptop and opened my email. Rachel Kim's message was already there. I read it twice, considering the implications of going public with what had happened. Then I hit reply. Rachel, I'd be happy to talk to you. But I want to focus on something specific: how success doesn't obligate you to share it with people who tried to prevent it. How family can be the people who support you, not just the people who share your DNA. How sometimes the best thing toxic people can do for you is get out of your way. I sent the email and started the car. Austin had texted the name of a bar downtown where the team wanted to celebrate. As I drove, I thought about the team I'd built. Developers who believed in the product. A sales manager who'd left a corporate job to take a chance on a startup. Investors who'd seen potential when everyone else saw risk. These were my people. This was my family. My phone rang again. This time it was my best friend, Meredith, who'd been following the trial remotely from Portland. Tell me everything, she demanded as soon as I answered. I laughed and did, describing my mother's theatrical performance, my father's red face, Judge Harrison's barely concealed contempt, and the moment everything fell apart for them. I'm so proud of you, Meredith said when I finished. You could have destroyed them in that courtroom, but you took the high road. I didn't do it for them, I admitted. I did it for me. Punishing them wouldn't have made me feel better. It would have just kept me tied to them longer. That's incredibly mature. Or incredibly tired, I countered. I'm just exhausted, Mare. I want to focus on building my company, not fighting with people who should have supported me from the start. We talked until I reached the bar. Through the window, I could see Austin and the rest of my team already there, laughing and gesturing animatedly. My team. My achievement. My future. I have to go, I told Meredith. But thank you for being there through all of this. Always, she said simply. Inside the bar, Austin had ordered a round of drinks. To Tessa, he said, raising his glass. For building something amazing and not letting anyone take it away from her. Everyone drank to that. I felt the warmth of genuine friendship, earned respect, and shared accomplishment. This was what success really felt like. Not the money or the Forbes article or the company valuation. It was this moment, surrounded by people who'd chosen to be part of my journey. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I looked at the framed first dollar I'd ever earned from TrueManage. A business owner in Ohio had paid me $25 for a monthly subscription to the beta version. I'd printed out the payment confirmation and framed it, a reminder of where everything started. My parents had never seen this apartment. They didn't know about the first dollar, the investor meetings, the late nights debugging code, or the moment I'd finally hired my first employee. They'd missed all of it because they decided my dreams weren't worth their attention. And now they wanted to claim ownership of the result. I thought about the no-contact order, which would remain in effect unless I chose to lift it. Part of me felt relieved. Protected. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Rachel Kim had responded to my message. That's exactly the angle I want to take. When can we talk? I scheduled a call for the following week, then set my phone aside and opened my laptop. Even after everything today, I had work to do. A new feature to review. Client feedback to address. An investor presentation to prepare. This was my life now. Built by my hands, funded by my determination, grown through my persistence. My parents couldn't take credit for it because they'd had no part in creating it. The best thing they'd ever done for my success was fail to support it, forcing me to find another way. Judge Harrison had been right. Their lawsuit was one of the most transparent attempts at exploitation he'd seen. But it was also a perfect ending to our relationship. They'd shown their true colors in the most public, undeniable way possible. There was no going back from that, no pretending things could be different. And I didn't want them to be different. I wanted exactly what I had: freedom from their judgment, protection from their exploitation, and the peace of knowing I'd done this entirely on my own terms. 3 months from now, True Manage would launch its expanded enterprise version. 6 months from now, we'd open our second office. A year from now, if projections held, the company would be worth somewhere between $35 and $40 million. My parents wouldn't be part of any of it. They'd had their chance to support me, believe in me, and be proud of me. They'd chosen differently. That was their loss, not mine. I closed my laptop and looked around my apartment. Modest but comfortable. Earned. Mine. Outside my window, the city lights sparkled against the dark sky. Somewhere out there were other people like me, building something against the odds, facing resistance from the very people who should be cheering them on. I hope they'd hear my story. I hope they'd know they weren't alone. And I hope they'd understand that sometimes the people who doubt you are actually giving you the greatest gift possible, proof that you can succeed without them.